Eli wakes up lying on a table in front of a speaker from which an unknown voice insistently asks her name. The girl tries to compose herself and understand what is happening, but the voice does not respond to her questions, only repeats the same thing, insisting that Eli must undergo a brief survey. Realizing that she cannot leave the room, she agrees to the test, but soon realizes that she does not know any of the answers. She doesn't remember her name, where she was born, or even what her mother looks like. Confused, Eli sits on the floor, and at that moment the door to the room opens. In the doorway, she sees the silhouette of a man. Shortly before this, sitting in his car, Mark Scout is having an emotional breakdown, unable to stop crying. He finally composes himself, wipes his face, and gets out of the car to head to work at the Lumen company building as if nothing had happened. In the locker room, Scout changes his shoes, his watch, and his ID badge, replacing his name with a blue square with the company logo. At the entrance, a guard inspects him with a device similar to a metal detector. After this, the employee enters an elevator where he feels a slight dizziness that completely alters his mental state. Easily navigating the labyrinth of immaculate corridors, Mark arrives at his office, designed for 4 employees and labeled as the Macro Data Refinement Department. Each employee sitting in front of their computer selects random numbers from a screen full of options. After a few minutes of work, Scout realizes that only 2 of his colleagues are present. He sadly notes that his colleague and best friend, Petey, has not come to work without notifying anyone. Milch, the assistant director, enters the office smiling and invites Mark to accompany him. They both arrive at Harmony Cobal's office, the head of the department, who speaks to the employee as if all her words were memorized. She places a speaker in front of him from which the board of directors participates in the meeting. Mark only hears strange sounds. Cobal informs Mark that Petey no longer works for the company, which surprises and deeply annoys him. No explanation is given, but Mark is named as the new team leader, replacing his friend. Shortly after his appointment, Milch takes Mark to a room with a microphone and monitors, where he will be responsible for receiving a new employee. Thus, Mark becomes the voice and silhouette that Eli first saw. When Mark enters the room with the frightened young woman, he calmly begins to explain that she is now an employee of Lumen. Ignoring Eli's questions and objections, Mark begins to read important information about the separation between personal life and work. Eli loses patience and throws the speaker at Mark's head. Still, she cannot leave and ends up sitting down again to listen. Mark, unable to bear the situation, breaks the rules and suggests Eli ask to leave 3 times. Finally, he takes her out of the room. Mark guides Eli through several white corridors until they reach an exit that indicates the separate walkway is prohibited. Mark tells her that she can leave the building, but upon exiting, Eli finds herself back in the same place. Mark then takes her to Harmony's office, who receives her as a new employee and gives her a disc that supposedly will explain everything. On the disc, she sees a recording of herself saying that she voluntarily participates in a program to separate her consciousness between work and personal life called Severance. At 5 in the afternoon, the workday ends, and employees leave the building, exiting the elevator without remembering anything about work, their colleagues, or the day in general. When Mark almost runs over Eli with his car, neither of them recognizes the other. On the car's windshield, Mark finds an envelope from the company saying that he suffered an accidental fall at work and, as compensation, they give him a voucher for a restaurant. He also doesn't remember that the bruise on his forehead was due to his interaction with Eli. Upon returning home, Mark confronts his strange neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, and plans to spend the night in front of the television as always. However, his pregnant sister, Devon, appears and drags him to a dinner with friends to try and cheer him up. In this world, Mark still hasn't gotten over the death of his wife, which led him to accept the severance procedure to forget his pain. During dinner, the hosts only serve a glass of water, and the topic of Mark's severance becomes a subject of discussion. Devon convinces her brother to spend the night at her house, and they both talk late into the night about their childhood and parents. Waking up in the middle of the night for water, Mark sees a strange man in the yard, hidden behind a tree, watching him. The next day, Mark decides to use the voucher and goes to the restaurant where the same man sits at his table and demands that he turn off his phone. That man is Petey, his best friend and former colleague, whom Mark doesn't remember. Petey hands him an envelope with an address and briefly explains that he managed to remember everything after the severance procedure. Later, Mrs. Selvig apologizes to Mark for the arguments about the trash and kindly asks him to sleep more and take care of himself. Looking at her, Mark doesn't recognize his neighbor as his boss, Harmony Coble. It's difficult to know if Harmony also knows they are neighbors or if she also lives with two separate personalities. At work, Eli continues her training at Lumen, but still doesn't fully understand what is happening, even though Milch has explained the severance operation several times. A new workday begins, and Mark organizes his office, drinks coffee, and while cleaning his desk, focuses on a group photo that shows him with his colleagues, including Petey. He takes identical photos from the other desks and hides them in a closet so as not to be saddened by his friend's absence. When all the employees gather in the office, Mark explains to Eli what they do there. She doesn't fully understand the purpose of searching for numbers, but sits and observes the monitor along with the others. During the day, Eli discovers that her other version, the one who lives outside Lumen, is called Audi. But there's no way to communicate with her since the guards at the entrance check for codes or messages. Milch gathers the team for a usual game, where each participant talks about what they remember, know, and feel. During the meeting, Mark shares his concerns about Petey, saying that he doesn't know if his friend is alive. Milch abruptly interrupts, reminding everyone that there are no fatalities at Lumen, as the company takes care of its employees. The activity ends with a new group photo, but Eli announces that she doesn't want to work there and plans to leave. Over time, Eli realizes that this version of herself cannot leave the Lumen building. Furthermore, her rebellion puts her in the hands of Mr. Grainer, head of security, but Mark manages to save her, preventing Grainer from taking her to the break room, punishment room. Returning home, Mark plans to read the postcard Petey left him, but a knock at the door interrupts him. Mrs. Selvig decides to visit him and offers him homemade cookies as an apology. After saying goodbye to his neighbor, Mark falls asleep and doesn't remember the postcard until the next morning. He calls work saying he's sick, decides to take a day off, and drives to the address mentioned on the postcard, finding an abandoned area of the city where he discovers his friend in an old greenhouse. Meanwhile, one of Mark's colleagues, the elderly Irv, falls asleep at his desk and receives a reprimand from management. He is sent to the company psychologist, and while waiting for his appointment, he meets Bert, an employee of his same age from another department. In his meeting with Petey, Mark learns of the existence of a room where employees repeat monotonous apologies for their mistakes at work. Petey, who managed to cancel his severance, reveals that something terrible is happening at the company, and that's why he's being pursued. Mark takes his friend home and hides him in the basement. Petey constantly suffers from headaches and hallucinations, often feeling as if he's still at work. When he recovers, Petey tells Mark that there is no double life and that while they are out, their other versions continue working in the office. Despite all the details, Mark insists he doesn't want to cancel the severance to avoid remembering his deceased wife. However, Petey tells him that he has seen him crying with red eyes at work because even there he feels the pain, although he doesn't remember what caused it. Reading the news in the morning, Mark reports that Eli's Audi rejected the resignation from Lumen. Petey is left alone at home and hears the door open upstairs. Secretly observing, he recognizes his former boss in the uninvited visitor. Hallie constantly tries to pass a message to her Audi version, but Mark watches her closely. When she decides to swallow a pen cap with the note, he warns her that the detector will pick it up, which will lead to an unpleasant procedure to extract it. In the hallway, the office employees meet their colleagues, including Bert, Irv's friend. The men exchange some standard phrases and wink at each other. The entire company heads to the Perceptual Center to learn more about Lumen's creators and managers. Hallie tries again to use the situation to escape, but this time, Mark fails to protect her. Chief Grainer takes her to the break room, where she is forced to repeat words of apology and repentance more than 1,000 times until she shows true remorse. Mark notices that the group photo session pictures have arrived and decides to replace the old ones. While removing the photos from the frames, he discovers a blueprint of the building drawn by Petey on one of them. Meanwhile, Petey arrives at a convenience store and collapses unconscious. The ambulance fails to help him in time. All this happens in front of Mark, who quickly returns home to remove any trace of his friend's stay in the basement. After turning off the lights, he hears his colleague's phone ring. Bert visits Irv to deliver the bags they sew in the department before the others. He also invites him to visit his office, an invitation Irv eagerly accepts. Hallie returns to the office completely depressed after spending all day in tests. Mark tries to talk to her and make sure she doesn't cause any more conflicts, but upon finding the photo with a map drawn by Petey on Mark's desk, Hallie accuses him of hypocrisy as he asks her to accept the situation while he hides such things. Bert shows Irv paintings in his apartment and at one point touches his hand, which makes Irv, embarrassed, rush back to his desk. Devon's husband leaves a gift at Mark's door, his own book about the meaning of life without severance. However, when Harmony burst into the neighbor's house, she took the book and brought it to work. Back at the office, Irv noticed the bright cover of the book, but what really surprised him was the dedication on the first page, which indicated that the book was for Mark Scout. Irv took the book to Mark, but as expected, Mark didn't remember his relative or anything about his life outside Lumen. Unwilling to give up, Hallie found a paper cutter in the office and, threatening to harm herself, demanded permission to record a message for her Audi version. Upon receiving a response, she realized that the issue was not so much about the company as it was about herself. Hallie's response from the outside world was that she should continue her work at Lumen. Petey's phone, hidden in the basement, kept vibrating, but seeing an unknown number on the screen, Mark hesitated to answer. Later, Mark goes to the funeral home to say goodbye to his friend and is surprised to see his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, who also didn't expect to find him there. Both lie about the reason for their visit, but the woman keeps her eyes on her neighbor throughout the ceremony. Mark meets the deceased's ex-wife and daughter, who immediately become suspicious of how the man knew the family head. While everyone is busy saying goodbye, Harmony approaches the body and removes the severance chip from Petey's head. Upon arriving home, Mark decides not to enter and drives to the place where his wife died. For her part, Harmony takes the chip to work and asks Milch to examine it in the lab to find out how Petey managed to cancel the severance. She also calls Casey, the team psychologist, asking her to conduct a session with Mark, fearing that he might also try to cancel his severance. Locked in the bathroom, Mark reads the stolen book about the meaning of life. When it's time for his session, he attends promptly. The psychologist lights a candle that Harmony had stolen from a box with the personal belongings of Mark's deceased wife. Harmony observes the conversation from a monitor. Hallie, after saying goodbye to her colleagues, returns home in the elevator. She carries a trash can and a rope. Unable to bear more monotonous days without the possibility of freedom, she ties the rope to the ceiling, desperate to find a way out. Hallie kicks the trash can out from under her feet. Mark calls the elevator at the end of the workday, and when the doors open, he sees Hallie lifeless. Trying to save his colleague, Mark calls for help, and Mr. Grainer immediately appears, ordering him to quickly enter the elevator to avoid witnesses. The next day, the first thing Mark remembers is the incident with Hallie. Upon arriving at the office, he is taken directly before Harmony and Milch, who reprimand him for not having watched his colleague. Harmony gives Petey's chip to Grainer and instructs him to find out who hacked it and how a severed consciousness was restored. Grainer asks if Harmony informed the board of directors about what happened with Hallie, but she avoids answering. Locked in the bathroom, Mark continues reading the stolen book, which inspires him more and more. After work, he collects his things from the locker and sees several voice messages from Rickon informing him that Devon is about to give birth. Everyone expects her brother to be present, so Mark goes directly to the maternity home to support his sister. While talking to Rickon, Mark discovers that the book his brother-in-law left at his door never reached its destination. Devon leaves the maternity home for coffee and meets another pregnant woman. The expectant mothers talk and discuss their unborn children, but Devon must return because her contractions intensify. Comforting his sister, Mark shares his suspicions about Lumen and his intention to discover what the company is truly doing. The psychologist, Ms. Casey, visits the office with the task of monitoring Hallie and reporting any signs of sadness or melancholy to management. Despite the specialist's surveillance, Mark manages to take Hallie to another place where they can talk unheard. Wandering through the corridors, they find a department where goats are raised, which surprises them greatly and confirms that none of the severed employees have any idea what the company actually does. Irv meets Bert in the conference room, but their conversation is interrupted by Dylan, who forbids his colleague from interacting with employees from other departments. Ms. Casey finds the fugitives and returns them to the office, while Harmony observes them through a monitor. Mark explains that the escape was just a walk for his colleague's health. At home, Harmony receives a call from Grainer, informing her that they traced the origin of the hack on Petey's chip. According to the head of security, only one person could have done it, a former Lumen employee named Gabby. Mark takes his friend's phone from the box and sees that the unknown number is still calling. After giving birth, Devon goes for a walk in the park with her baby and sees the same woman she met at the maternity home. The woman gestures to Devon but gets no response. Then Devon decides to approach. Upon arriving, she realizes that the woman doesn't remember her, and furthermore, the baby she is carrying has a different name than Devon thought. In the macro data refinement department, the 4 employees gather in the cafeteria. Mark and Hallie suggest exploring the building and getting to know other departments, but Irv and Dylan, who are more timid and obedient to the rules, disagree with the idea. Harmony calls Mark and informs him that Ms. Casey was punished and sent to the break room for not having watched Hallie the day she tried to leave through the window. Despite this, the 4 decide to visit Bert's department to find out what they do there. While the colleagues get to know each other, Dylan explores the unfamiliar place and finds some interesting cards. He manages to save one in his pocket before Milch, irritated, arrives and returns them to their office. Back in the department, they are greeted by Harmony, who, after leading the singing of the Lumen anthem, sends Mark to the break room. There he finds an exhausted Casey. Meanwhile, Devon looks for a lactation consultant and receives a visit from an experienced nurse. When the nurse arrives at the new parent's house, Devon recognizes her as her neighbor, Mrs. Selvig. When she takes the baby in her arms, the little one stops crying, and the couple trusts her without questioning how she got there. In another scene, Dylan is sitting in front of the television watching cartoons, closing his eyes and counting to 1,000, but loses count. Later, he finds himself disoriented in the locker room, not understanding where he is. Milch appears, demanding to know where he hid the card from the neighboring department. Suddenly, a child runs into the locker room, jumps onto Dylan's neck, and calls him Dad. Dylan realizes that his work consciousness has been transferred to his outie's life, and thus discovers what his life outside Lumen is like. In the middle of the night, Mark decides to answer a call on Petey's phone. A female voice identifies who she is talking to and asks to meet. Mark arrives at a faculty where he finds Gabby, who had installed the chips in all the severed individuals and is now trying to fix the situation. During the conversation, Grainer suddenly appears, but Gabby confronts him, explaining that he is a threat to everyone who tries to eliminate the Severance. Gabi sends Mark home and promises to contact him to help him recover his other personality trapped in Lumen. Before saying goodbye, she gives him Grainer's pass, which cannot be tracked, and opens any door, and instructs him to take it to work, hoping the other Mark understands how to use it. Mark arrives at work, and Dylan asks Milch about what happened and who the child who called him Dad was. Dylan can't think of anything else, realizing he has a different life happening elsewhere. The supervisor tries to downplay the situation, and knowing Dylan's fondness for rewards, promises him special bonuses, explaining that it was a random activation that went a little out of control. Employees discover that they are now locked in to prevent them from wandering the corridors and interacting with other departments. Meanwhile, Harmony visits Devon's house daily as a supposed consultant, but in reality, she tries to gather more information about Mark. During a tea talk, she finally discovers that Mark has doubts about his work and already regrets having undergone the severance procedure. Milch arrives at the office and announces a 5-minute music and dance event to cheer up the team. During the activity, Mark finds a pass in his pocket, realizing it was probably given by his Audi version. He decides to hide it to use at a more opportune moment. The music break ends abruptly when Dylan attacks Milch, demanding that he tell him about the child he accidentally saw during the activation. Dylan shares his experience with his colleagues and how he saw his son. Now he wants to cancel the severance. Hallie understands that there is a way to wake up and just needs to discover the details to return to her normal life. Of the four, only Irv disagrees with breaking the community rules and tries to dissuade his friends. Using Grainer's pass, the group goes into the hallway, but Irv separates from the others and goes to the neighboring department to find out what happened to Bert. Meanwhile, Mark and Hallie decide not to waste time and find a control point that can manage all Lumen employees. Taking the manual, the pair returns to the office to avoid being caught by Harmony. Irv arrives at the other department and finds a party celebrating Bert's retirement. Horrified, he realizes that he will never see his friend again. He tries to explain that there is only one reason to leave Lumen, but everyone pretends not to hear his arguments. Dylan studies the instructions, and the group discovers that not everyone can exchange consciousnesses. Someone must manage the process from within. Dylan volunteers for this, allowing the others to escape to the outside world and find someone to help them cancel the severance. He then returns to his department. Irv tells his friends that he is going to look for a way out with them, wishing to erase the light of existence. Irv's Audi sits on a park bench with his dog. Upon returning home, he approaches the easel and paints a picture using only black colors. There are already dozens of identical black paintings leaning against the walls. Harmony calls Mark and schedules his last session with Ms. Casey, supposedly to close the quarter. In the office, Mark discovers that the psychologist is working her last day and will be replaced by another specialist. Employees await Dylan's waffle party, planning to use that time for the exchange. Trying to act calmly, they rehearse the escape plan. The board of directors learns of the incident with Hallie in the elevator and suspends Harmony from her role as company manager. Using the stolen pass, Mark sends his friends to the outside one by one, leaving himself for last. Dylan goes to the waffle party, but then sneaks off to the control center to initiate the operation. Each employee, upon reaching the outside world, must carefully study their Audi's life and discover who in their circle can help. Harmony, devastated by her dismissal after so many years of loyal service, is at home when the doorbell rings. Resuming her identity as Mrs. Selvig, she opens the door and finds Mark, who asks her if she will attend the event Devon and Rickon are organizing for the book launch. Initially feigning health problems, Mrs. Selvig ends up agreeing to go, saying she will arrive later. When she arrives at the party, she tries to stay close to Mark to understand why he wants to leave Lumen. Dylan breaks into the control room and locks himself in, preparing to release his friends. Upon reaching the controls, he pulls the levers and begins the process. Being at Devon's house, Mark's Audi doesn't recognize anyone, and the same happens with Irv and Hallie. Irv finds himself in front of an easel with a black canvas, while Hallie is at a reception surrounded by influential people. Discovering from the guests that Devon is his sister, Mark tries to talk to her in private to ask for help, but he fails due to the crowd and chaos in the house. Exploring his apartment, Irv realizes that he is alone except for his dog. He finds military awards in a trunk along with objects and photos of his son who died in the war. Hallie's situation is the most complicated. While examining the room, she realizes that she is not only a participant in the Severance program, but also a direct descendant of Lumen's founders, daughter of the company's current owner. Her Audi is supposed to give a speech that day about the benefits of having two personalities and not spending personal life at work. At the bottom of the trunk, Irv finds strange records and a map full of markings. It's clear that his Audi has been trying to uncover the mystery of Lumen for a long time. Putting everything together, he finds the car keys and plans to drive to Bert's, whose name was marked on the map. Meanwhile, the guests at Devon's house listen attentively to Rickon, but Mark is focused on finding help. Noticing his boss, he doesn't immediately realize that she shouldn't be there. By referring to Harmony by her last name, Mark accidentally reveals his plan. In a panic, he runs to his sister, leaving Harmony confused. Devon hands the baby to the feeding assistant and finally finds time for her brother. She tells him that she is actually another person and urgently needs help to get out of the trap. She doesn't fully understand what's happening, but explains that the true Mark decided to have the surgery to deal with the pain of his wife Gemma's death. Hallie, seeing her own interview on giant screens about the benefits of Severance, feels dizzy and hides in the bathroom where her father finds her and expects a vibrant speech. Mark asks his sister about his Lumen boss. Being at the party and based on Devon's description, he realizes that he entrusted his daughter to a terrifying woman. Rushing out of the room, Devon begins to look for her daughter, but finds neither the nanny, nor the car, nor the child. Eventually, a guest finds the baby in an empty room. Meanwhile, Harmony runs to Lumen, calling Milch to inform him of the emergency. The three employees have escaped to the outside world. Milch runs to the control room and tries to convince Dylan to open the door. Realizing that bonuses and rewards wouldn't work in that situation, the supervisor promises to tell Dylan not only about the child in the closet, but also about his two children. Dylan stands firm, but Milch understands that he needs to enter the room, so he cuts the belt with which Dylan secured himself. Upon arriving at the specified address, Irv sees his friend from the neighboring department relaxing with a colleague at home. Hallie prepares to go on stage, ready to tell the truth. Mark, alone in the room, decides to look at family photos, and in one of them sees his deceased wife, who, to his horror, is Ms. Casey. Harmony arrives at the gala event and tells Hallie that she knows everything. Unfazed, Hallie whispers her plans to her boss and goes on stage. Despite threats that her friend will suffer, Irv gets out of the car and knocks on Bert's door to tell him the truth about working at Lumen. Mark tells his sister that his wife is alive and that he knows where to find her. As Hallie begins to speak on stage, she reveals that all the stories about the benefits of Severance are lies and that Audis suffer trapped. At that moment, Milch cuts the belt, bursts into the control room, and pushes Dylan away from the levers. All the fugitives return to the consciousness of their personal lives.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.